Good morning. Welcome to the open session for Tuesday, March the 4th. And as we prefer to start our meetings, we'll start with a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll start with item 1, budget overview presentation.
Okay. Taking the first big step in the FY26 process now. I just want to point out that our preparations are not done at this point. It's largely done, but there are still some things we're working on. And even some things I say today could still change before we meet again. Core messages this year. A number of changes have led us to a better bottom line on the op plan. So don't say I never bring any good news. But even though the picture is better, we remain overcommitted. And Blueprint, still a big question mark for us. So the recommended budget will be coming on the 18th. Be built on our existing plans and what direction we have from the board. And as always, there are times when we know what individually you might want or not want. But what helps us to put this together for you is when we know that the board is taking a position in favor of or against something. And even now, we're getting into it all, but if there are things that you have to offer us, we will take that and try to build it into what we'll be bringing back to you. Goals for today. This is primarily to set the stage for the discussions to come. We won't be looking for any decisions today, but this is a good time to talk about any ideas about the process and the budget that you might have. I'll start out talking about the state budget. As always, there is uncertainty, even more this year than in most. The governor's budget is dependent on about $2 billion worth of legislative changes. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, the BRFA, which has all the legislative changes that he needs to balance his budget, is 132 pages long. This is the Department of Legislative Services fiscal and policy note on that bill. This is 191 pages long. There's a lot of things in the mix there. And with what's happening in the General Assembly, I think it's already clear that there are pieces of what the governor has put into his legislative request that won't be happening. That just introduces more uncertainty for us. If something he needs to balance his budget isn't going to be there, then the question becomes what other change is going to be made to bring the budget back into balance again.
When are we safe with that, do you think? When do we know that the changes are done?
Well, not until the General Assembly is finished. Sine die is April 7th.
So within a month of us needing to approve the budget?
Yes. Yeah, and it's an unfortunate part of the timing of the process. There could be very important decisions being made when you're already deep into your thinking about things.
Ted, on Friday, we submitted comments into the BRFA, correct? Didn't, Pam, didn't we provide our input into?
I know there have been things, whether it was Friday,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
it was Friday. Yeah, it was. So our input into the state, into the BRFA has been done on Friday. Now, where it is right now, I don't know, but I know that happened.
So we basically know that the state will be devolving certain costs to us. We just don't know exactly what yet.
Yeah, we almost certainly are going to be having costs passed on to us. And there are some things that if I had to bet right now, I'd bet are coming our way, but we don't know with certainty at this point. And to go back one bullet, the state will adopt a balanced budget. They have to do that. But their plan is unbalanced. And 5 years out, they're looking at a projected $3.2 billion shortfall. So even whatever comes out of this year, as we look further down the road, we know there are still difficulties ahead. Oh yeah, and on this, when are we going to know things? It's also complicated this year in that the General Assembly has stalled discussions on some items while they're waiting to see what's happening at the federal level. So maybe some things that would be moving ahead even aren't moving ahead. And I've heard some talk, I don't know if there's anything to this, that they might actually even extend the session, which would make things even more difficult for you. So what does the state budget mean in Carroll County? There's aid to local government. And you've heard this from me, but for others who are listening, aid to local governments doesn't mean what it seems to mean. 85% of what's called aid to local government is actually the state funding to school systems. There's also funding to community colleges, health departments, and libraries. What is actually coming to Carroll County elected officials, commissioners, and town elected officials is less than 10% of this thing that gets called aid to local government. But in the mix there, state funding to Carroll County Public Schools is going up $7 million. That is largely about Blueprint, though. So this is targeted, restricted money that doesn't give them much flexibility for dealing with the whole system. And there are other things happening with school funding. And again, this is all the governor's budget. We don't know that this will turn out this way. But there's something called non-public placement. We sometimes have to put students into schools to meet special needs that we can't meet here. This is very expensive, high transportation costs. The state participates with us in this, but they're actually proposing to reduce funding by $600,000 in fiscal year 26, growing to $1.1 million in fiscal year 30. So those costs aren't going to go away, but the state funding is being reduced. And then we'll be getting to this in a bit, but they're also likely passing on more of the cost of teacher pensions to the county. And this is a really interesting thing. It's been probably a decade since they first involved us in this. And this is a state pension. State determines the benefits. They make the investment decisions. The retirements are going to people who work in the school system. They don't work for you. You have no say over what happens. But for some years now, we've been paying what's called the normal cost, what actuaries call the liability that's happening this year with these employees. What the state is doing now, or suggesting now, is to begin passing some of the unfunded liability. And unfunded liability means the state had not made the payments they needed to make to be in the appropriate position. So now what they're talking about is saying, we haven't kept up with the funding. Counties, you're now going to help us keep up with the funding. The original proposal was for about $2.5 million shift which was half of the unfunded liability created in this last year. This recently has moved to all of that cost that was created this year, or about $5 million. When we first started funding, one of the things I said, and I've said many times since then, once that door's open, it's a lot easier to go through. Now, if they open the door to unfunded liability, there's nothing to keep them from next session saying, well, we gave Carroll 5, let's make it 10, let's make it 15, whatever they might need to balance the budget. Carroll Community College, this is actually a good news story for now, assuming that this sticks. They're going to get an increase of about $1.1 million, about 8%. And the state has actually funded the community college as well in 3 out of the last 4 years. So it's been a relatively good time for the college. Small increase for Carroll County Public Library. Remember, the funding that comes from the state, the library uses for purchasing materials, so the books, CDs, movies, et cetera. And Health Department getting a $300,000 increase, or about 4%.
Mr. Zaleski, going back to the Carroll Community College, has there been any change to the dual enrollment formulas? That my understanding is that might change. And how
Yes,
does
you
that-
can only take 2 classes a semester now, so it's no longer unlimited.
Okay, that's the change. It's not a funding formula that changes or anything like that. It's 2. I knew it was changing. I just wasn't sure exactly how.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I don't think there's been a change to the funding mechanism, which means basically the community college gives up some revenue and the school system has to pay some of the cost. I believe that's all the same. It's just the move from unlimited to 2 per semester.
Thank you.
School system meaning us.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, let's call it what it is. It's not school system, it's county.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Carroll County Public Schools and the community college have an MOU. Some of the percentages might have changed a little bit, and CCPS is only paying for 2 classes. Students can take more, but they have to pay the percentage.
Yes, right, I didn't say that right.
Yeah.
2 free classes.
right.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. That's important.
Now, some funding that actually does come to Carroll County elected officials in our towns, highway user revenue, $4 million, 14% increase. This is true for the towns and us. Next year, in current legislation, there'll be a similar level of funding, but in fiscal year '28, that funding legislatively drops. I forget where it goes to, but back to $1 million or $2 million. Of course, that's assuming that nothing happens in this legislative session. And highway user revenue was something I thought the state might go after in trying to balance their budget this year. That didn't happen in the governor's budget. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that that's still part of the picture, though.
They tried to do that last year, then at the last minute, they restored at least some of the funding for HUR.
That was this year,
Last year into the current fiscal year.
right.
Okay, yeah, that could be. It gets hard to remember. I've watched so many things happen.
They basically, no, you're absolutely right. They tried taking away, and as a good gesture, they put it back, and it's like, wait, you just put back something we already had. So, yeah, but that was, I believe that was this year for FY26.
And it's getting to be old history, but I think useful to bring up sometimes. We talk about a 14% increase. Shouldn't lose that more than a decade ago, the state cut this revenue by 90%.
Right.
So even when we talk about increases, we've never gotten even remotely close to what we used to get in this revenue. And, to be fair, this is a state shared revenue. They can choose what they want to do with it. My point is just it changes how we have to deal with things if they make a change. Program open space, small decrease. Well, I shouldn't say small decrease. 9% decrease. This is not a policy decision. This is about how much transfer tax came in. So we're just getting the same share of a smaller pot of money. Have the same concerns with program open space. You know, I thought they might go after it. It wasn't in the governor's budget to change anything. Still could happen, and actually there's been some current talk about diverting some of this revenue to the maintenance of the state system, which has happened before. Again, probably 10 years ago, they permanently moved money away from local jurisdictions to maintaining the state system.
And this is something that, regarding MACO, was very protective to maintain program open space dollars, because there was lots of threats of it going away.
Yep, and it's been changed many times over the years. Now, looking at funding that is actually coming to you. Highway user revenue, $4.3 million, 13% increase. And you might notice that the dollar funding between the towns and us is about the same, although we take care of many, many more miles of roads than the towns do. And when the state started restoring some of the highway user revenue, they were much nicer to the towns than they were to the counties. They recovered more of what they lost. Now, still far from what they once had, but they left the towns in a little stronger position. Police aid basically flat, and then program open space decrease of $600,000. Again, this is just a same share of the smaller pot. And program open space is almost all of our funding for our park capital program. If this was to go away, we would have some interesting decisions to make on how we move ahead.
Are they discussing changing the percentage that we were required for purchase versus maintenance?
Yes, there is legislation that would, I'll back up a second. As things stand, 25% of program open space has to be used for land acquisition. I would argue we're in a position where we need the money more to take care of what we have than to add to our inventory. So this would be a good thing if it happens. I don't know if there's expectations that it's going to pass or not, though. So where are we now on revenue? And we just talked about this last week, I think. So it's a bit of a recap, but FY25 budget, $545 million. With what we know today, we believe we'll have about $570 million of revenue at the end of the year, or about $26 million in excess of budget. I say this with the big caution: income tax, our second largest revenue. We've gotten in about 50% of what we'll get for the year. We won't see any significant distributions again until after you've made all your decisions. It's conceivable that it could be even more than we've planned on, but it's also quite possible it could be less than we've planned on, and there's no way for us to know. Looking at revenues and expenditures, there's the same 26.1 in revenues we just talked about. There's still $4.2 million remaining in your reserve for contingencies, and we're estimating now about $10 million of unexpended, or things that have been budgeted that we don't believe will be spent by the end of the year. So you put those two things together, they're both really unexpended items, $14.2 million. That added to the revenue will give you $40.3 million at the end of the year. We have an existing unassigned fund balance of 34.2. $5 million is the 1% that we always plan to carry over to a future year, leaving, again, with what we know right now, a projected $69.5 million of unassigned fund balance. This is a number that's gotten some attention, and specifically in connection with Blueprint and funding schools. One board member Board of Education board member suggested that we make use of this fund balance to fund their $57 million budget request. The problem with that idea is that this money is one time. You could give it to the school system this year, but you won't have it again next year. So one way of looking at this could be to say, okay, well, we'll fund that money for you this year, but you're going to have to figure out what's going to happen next year. But you can't even do that because this would establish a new level of maintenance of effort for us, and you would be committed to it in the future. And we're not there yet, but when we get to our position, clearly we don't have an extra $50 million a year to add to our plans.
Operationally.
Yes.
Right. And that's the hardest, I think, concept for folks to understand, to include us as we move forward is like you explained, one-time funds, that's kind of sitting there, the 69.5, and then what is necessary operational or ongoing year after year after year after year, and this cannot match that. Right?
No.
Okay.
And just want to point out, this would be a bigger unassigned fund balance than we typically would have. But even at that, it's 7.4%. While that's bigger than we might typically have, it's still not a huge amount of money relative to the size of the budget. And you might remember I've been pushing for us to do something by policy to have 5% of unassigned fund balance always there. So if we had that, we'd be looking at 2.5% here as kind of something to work with. Now, the reason I've pushed for that, there are lots of reasons, but two big things. One is it gives you more flexibility for the unexpected. When things come along that we couldn't plan for, you have unassigned fund balance, you have a way to deal with things in a short-term way without having to resort to drastic actions to balance a budget in the moment. And the other, we're going to be talking a lot more about revenue. And sometimes we have discussions about how conservative or careful we're being, how aggressive we could be. If you had 5% unassigned fund balance sitting there, it's easier to be more aggressive on your revenue projections, because if it doesn't turn out the way you want and you're 3 million or 5 million short, you have a way to make that work while you recalculate your position.
So if you were pushing for the 5% and that became reality, then you only have 23 or 24 million excess above that. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
She's asking if she's allowed to ask questions.
Oh, no. No, none of our meetings are question and answer, even when there is public comment.
Curious about that extra, like why do we have it this year but not next year?
I've got no idea what you're saying.
He's got some difficulty hearing.
Yeah.
Continue, Mr. Zaleski.
There are listening devices in the back.
I'm sorry.
Continue.
For anybody who has questions, I'd be glad to talk with people outside of this meeting to,
Yeah,
Explain
yeah,
things.
emails are on the website, phone numbers on the website, and so, yeah, you're welcome to accumulate questions today and then send them. And while we're taking a minor break, agenda item 6 on Thursday is the CCPS coming here to present Blueprint and their budget, and that would be the time for a public comment during item 6. There's still not a question and answer, and in theory, if you do public comment, we're not going to ask you questions, you're not going to ask us questions, in theory.
And I should also say, too, that if you are unable to make any meeting, whether it's this Thursday or any Thursday, there's always the option to call in as well.
Okay, let's look at our top revenues. We have about 120 revenues. What you see right here is more than 90% of your operating budget. And if you don't consider transfers, it's even a greater part of your annual revenues, the things that happen every year. We're going to talk about each of these in greater detail, but just a quick look. You can see what was budgeted in fiscal year '25, what we're now projecting for fiscal year '25, and then what we expect to be recommending to budget in fiscal year '26.
How did we do?
Pardon me?
How did we do from projection to, actual numbers? I mean, how do you feel? You've been doing this a long time, and you don't want to over and you don't want to under, but you got to be careful. So what's your comfort level?
Okay, important point you made there, since we're, going to have this discussion. My goal in looking at revenues is always to get as close to what you actually have to work with as I can without putting you over what's going to come in. Because the danger there is that we end up in the middle of a year having to try to pull back money to balance the budget, which is a place we don't want to be. So if things go well, we will always be on the low side or have more come in than we counted on. In '25, the two interesting stories, and again, we'll be talking more about this, will be income tax and our investment income. I'm not sure that I would have changed anything knowing what I knew at the time that we did these, but we'll get into that more in just a minute.
And the property tax is a little more stable, and I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but you're probably more comfortable with that. Income tax is hard to predict, and it's gone up and down in past years, correct?
Yes. Property tax is much more predictable. After the housing bust, after the big housing boom, we actually saw a decline in property tax revenue, which we had never seen before. So I never get quite as comfortable as I once did. But generally speaking, there aren't big surprises in property tax. There are often big surprises in income tax. So how did things change from the adopted operating plan, the one we're working on right now, and the one that we are working toward? You can see in real property tax some fairly significant change. And this is because of the last reassessment came out on January 1st. This was Group 1, the southern part of Carroll County. It came in about 20%, which was more than we expected. But the change is not so much about that reassessment, because we had built in 15% for South Carroll, because it's phased in over 3 years, and we have a 5% homestead tax cap. That maxes out how much revenue it would generate. But in fiscal years '27 and '28, we rethought things. I believed that assessments had probably caught up to the big run-up in the housing market we've had the last handful of years. But this South Carroll reassessment clearly says, no, we haven't. So we went back and looked at Group 2, which is Hampstead, Manchester, Northeast, and Group 3, which is Westminster and the Northwest. And we basically looked at kind of 6 years, but offset, looking at a 3-year cycle for each of those group, 2 3-year cycles for each of those groups. And we upped our projections for 27 and 28 to fall in line with what the Group 1 reassessment seemed to suggest. And of course, once that goes up, you have a new base that carries through all the years. And we'll get back to this. We do drop our expectations in 29 and 30, though. Railroad and public utility up about $1.5 million. And this is one where we probably under budgeted fiscal year 25 by maybe $500,000. So it's not quite as big a change as it appears. And this is a hard one. It doesn't change a lot, but most of this revenue is generated by just a small number of companies, Verizon, BGE, Colonial Pipeline, and we don't get any information on what they're doing. So they could be adding to their infrastructure, and the only thing we might know is, oh, we saw somebody digging along Route 27, but we don't have any dollars to put to that. So sometimes something comes up and we don't really know it until it shows up in the tax levy. And business, this is business personal property tax, the tax on equipment and businesses changes very little. You can see you add all those up, have more than $4 million growing to almost $15 million additional on your bottom line. So the top line of this, the property tax, is the bottom line that we just showed you on the last slide. And then we have income tax. And again, we'll get deeper into this, but big idea, there's a number of things happening here that are working in different directions. One, we're going to come in over budget in income tax, and we're trying to figure out what that means. If legislation that's in the General Assembly now happens to change income tax, that will mean about $1 million loss to Carroll County. There are concerns about what's going on at the federal level and what that's going to mean for us. Unquantifiable at this point, but clearly something that needs to be on our minds. And we're coming off of a handful of years of strong, unusually strong growth in income tax. 4 out of the last 5 were good years. There seems to be little reason to think that we can continue to have that same kind of growth. And I say that particularly because even now, we still don't really understand why it's grown as much. And when I say we, I don't just mean me and Heidi. You know, I'm talking about people I talk with across the state, including the comptroller's office. And, you know, in the state comptroller's office, I mean, but they have a lot of information that we don't have access to. And they have people that spend a lot more time than we can. And they don't have good explanations either.
So the negative balance that's being shown from FY '28 beyond for income tax is a precautionary approach, given that we don't know what will end up happening with the income tax?
Yeah, so we have kind of competing things here. We are upping the base, but we also lowered our annual growth assumption. So in the first couple of years, the higher base has a bigger impact than the lower growth assumption. In the later years, that starts to change. But we are assuming 3.2% growth in income tax now. I know some counties that are lower than that, who are looking for almost no growth. The state's projection for 26 right now is 3%. Investment income, the big story here is this time last year, it seemed to be that interest rates were going to be heading down, and maybe quickly. It hasn't turned out that way. Revenue side for us, that's a good thing, and we'll talk more. Recordation, not much change. And then the other 115 revenues, all in total, added a little under $1 million to the bottom line.
And again, I'm sorry, so the investment income, or go back to, I'm sorry, Ted, go back one slide. So the investment income is being projected to decrease just based on the precaution.
It's going to be higher than expected.
Well, but in FY '26, we're looking at 6.6, and then by FY '30, we're looking at 2.5. So even though it's higher than flatlining, we're looking at less expectation as a precaution.
Yes, and we will go deeper into that in just a second.
Oh, sorry, thank
That's
you.
right.
And just quickly, these slides are online, correct? Or they will be?
Will be.
They will be online, because this is very complex. I mean, it's complex for us up here, it's complex for everyone watching it to capture the information. And like you said, Ted, you and your team are always available to get into the details.
Yes.
Because this is, I mean, this is really the sausage making. And if you don't understand this, it's hard to understand some of the decisions that need to be made, so.
Yep. And always happy to help people
Absolutely.
understand where'd that number come from, why is this way, where do I find something?
Yeah.
So this is reassessment history going back to 2005. Each bar is the reassessment for one of our three reassessment groups in that year. And you can see all the way to the left, that was the big housing boom. You had 2 years of more than 50% assessments. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but again, just as a reminder for people listening, you know, people see this and say, well, there must have been a ton of money coming in. The assessments are phased in over 3 years, so you have to chop that in three, but then you're subject to the homestead tax credit, which is 5%. So somebody's tax bill in 1 year can't go up more than 5% in Carroll County, more than 5%, no matter how much the assessment went up. And you'll see the blue line down at the bottom, which is actual revenue. So you see it reacts to assessment changes, but it doesn't move nearly as much as the assessments do. Then you see the 5 years of negative reassessments I mentioned a little bit earlier. Then we get back into what I think of as, a more normal time. You know, this, if we went far enough to the left, you would see other years that look like this. We have these spikes from time to time, but those are the kind of numbers that we generally would expect to see. Now, you see we've been, not like the last spike, but we've seen significant growth in recent years. Okay, here's the reassessments looked at into the future. What are our expectations? So right here you see the South Carroll reassessment, 20%. Remember, you have to divide by 3 and then cap it at 5. So you see that 5%, and the same thing holds true for the next 2 years. That's the 3 years of phasing in. Then in Group 2, North Carroll, you'll see this is our 15% expectation phased in over 2 years. And then in Group 3, we're not going quite after that, we drop to projections of 5%. Again, thinking about what is typical when we're not in a housing boom. So you see the 167, this be 167 over 3 years, and 167 over 3 years. Then for the impact to your revenue, you have to blend all 3 of those assessments in any 1 year. Now, you might look here and say 5, 5, 5, 4.52. Ted, you need to work on your math. It's because this is not simply averaging the growth rates. our assessment areas, the dollars of assessment in the areas are not equal. And in fact, South Carroll is more than 40% of our total assessment. So a 5% change in South Carroll has a bigger impact than a 5% change in the Northeast. And that's what you see in these numbers at the bottom. What does that do in combination? And you'll see as we move from 15% assessments to 5% assessments, you see how this starts to drop off. And in fiscal year 31, the growth we would expect from reassessments would be about 1.5%. This is your largest revenue. And if everything holds here, by the time we get to fiscal year 31, you would have growth of 1.5%. Now, of course, this won't be right. We don't know these numbers. But each year, as we get more information, we update this and, react to what we know. And it could be that we see another growth spurt in the housing market. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it can't happen. I'm just saying right now, there doesn't seem to be any compelling argument to build our expectations on that. Now, here's that same reassessment history, but with projections added to it. So everything over here is history. Everything over here is projecting to the future. And you can see the 15% I talked about for the Northeast, the 10% I talked about for the Northwest, followed by 5% a year after that. So this is carrying that same line you just looked at the bottom of the slide forward to here. There is another piece to this. In addition to what we get growth from reassessments, we also get growth from new construction. We reassess what's already there. New construction is adding to our assessable base. We build in $125 million worth of new construction into our plans. That translates into about $1.25 million of revenue. When you add that to the reassessments, you get this growth. So you see in fiscal year 30, instead of 1.5, we're talking about 2.5%. So total real property tax, you can see our actual for 24, our forecast for 25, and our forecast for 26. And if we look at this from up plan to op plan, at the top is the plan we're beginning work on. Then below that is the plan that exists today. And you can see what has been added to your bottom line. So when I say there are some good things that have put us in a better position, this is one of the good things. We don't need to spend a lot of time here, but just so you understand, there's even more going on behind the scenes in property tax. Mm-hmm. What the homestead tax credit does is basically take assessments off the table. Right. They're not taxed. They don't create revenue. So that we're not counting that, you have this negative here, which is the homestead tax credit. Now, this will change over time. And again, we have no way to predict other in a very macro way what's going to happen here because we don't know what assessment is going to be to Commissioner Gordon's house or Commissioner Kyler's house. We just know what happens in the big picture. And then there are other credits, including the Fallen Hero, which take another $500,000 out of the mix. Now, income tax, second largest revenue. As Commissioner Kyler said earlier, very volatile, very hard to project, very hard to understand. These are quarterly distributions. So each little diamond there is that quarterly distribution compared to the same distribution in the previous year. This is 0% here. So anywhere you see a dot below that line, that means it was a smaller distribution than that same distribution in the previous year. And in what we have on the screen here, in 8 out of 38 of the distributions, we actually were negative. So 20% of the time, we actually saw distribution go down. The problem is predicting when those things are going to happen. And you've heard me say before, anytime you look at these distributions and think you can draw a line into the future, you are wrong. Things change. And, one time, if you looked during that time period, it would be very tempting to draw that line that I just drew and say, oh, look where we're heading. But then look what happened right after that. And even in smaller time frames, look at this change. And, look what happened here. Even though there was growth, it changed so much. And this often happens with no warning. Mm-hmm. And generally without a lot of good explanation. And sometimes years after, we can look back and say, oh, okay, we can see what happened now. But in real time, we for the most part, just don't know.
You're loving your yellow highlighter.
Okay, now this is an important slide. There's a couple important points here that I want you to understand, where my thinking is. Yes, we budgeted $207 million in '24 and only ended up with 197. So when I said we had 4 out of 5 strong years, this is the year that wasn't a strong year. And, I had been reluctant to keep increasing how much we were expecting from income tax. And we made tens of millions of dollars worth of increases. So it's not that we weren't increasing, it's just how much and how long do we keep doing it? In that year, looking back, I wish we had not gone as far as we did. But then the other worry there is, even though we didn't make budget, $12.5 million of what was in there was from reconciling distributions, things related to previous tax years, not to what was happening in that tax year. It's very difficult to assume that you're going to get that money again in the future. Now, sometimes we are finding in reconciling distributions that there is something that should be built into the base. But again, the hard part is there's no sign on it that says, yes, I'm continuing revenue. It can be very difficult to get comfortable with the idea that part of what you got in a one-time distribution is part of a new base for you. So with those concerns, we budgeted $200 million in '25, less than we budgeted in '24, and just a little bit more than we got in actuals. Again, now the other thing that was on our minds at that time was we had 3 strong years and then a bad year. People like me across the state have all been thinking, this can't keep going. You see that, and it's easy to say, okay, maybe we're seeing the turn now. Still doesn't tell you how big a turn, but looks like it's here. Turns out it wasn't.
So I guess it's always a trend until it's not.
Yes. So we are now forecasting $214 million for FY '25. But again, a worry for me. We've only got about half of what we're going to get for the year, and $14 million of what we've seen is from reconciling distributions. Again, things that are about other tax years, not about what's fundamentally happening now. My worry last year didn't turn into what I was worried about, but I have the same concerns now. So we are projecting, we're recommending to you $211 million for fiscal year '26, which is actually less than we think we're going to end up with in '25. Although again, reminder, we still don't know a whole lot about '25. This relationship could end up looking different before we're done.
Ted, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Were there any years in which the reconciling items were zero or close to zero?
There absolutely are reconciling distributions that are zeros. Whether it was zero for a whole year, I don't know. I'd have to look at that. But and when that happens, what it means is we were over-distributed. We got more money than we should have. Nobody knew it at the time, but as more information becomes available, they say, oh, you had too much money. We're not giving you anything now. And sometimes it takes more than one reconciling distribution to get you back to where you're supposed to be. So it could have gone through a whole year. I just don't know.
So it could go in the opposite direction. Instead of us gaining more money over the course of time based on previous years, somebody, the state could come back and say, well, we overcommitted ourselves to you and now we have to take that money back. So that makes projections even more difficult.
Yes. And we never lose money. There's never a negative where we have to send a check to the comptroller's office. But they will hold us at zero until we're back into balance again. And again, for people listening, just so you understand when I talk about over-distributed, the thing that's important to understand is when your withholdings from your paycheck get sent to the comptroller's office, they don't know what county you live in. All they know is your money came in. It's not until they receive tax returns that they start to match up the inflow of money to which county is taxing it. So what the state does is they make an assumption every year, which is looking backwards to say, okay, well, what happened last year? Okay, Carroll County, you got 2.93%. So we're going to give you 2.93% of the money as it's coming in. Everybody knows that it's wrong, just don't know how much and in which direction until tax returns come in. And it takes 3 fiscal years to fully reconcile one tax year. So this takes a long time to play out. Now, sometimes people will say, well, that's a stupid system. Why do you do that? The problem is nobody's ever come up with a better way to do it, because the basic problem is when the money comes in, they don't know who to give it to. Now, there is one solution, but it could never work, and that's they don't send us the money until they know it's our money. But to make that happen, we'd have to go a couple years without any income tax revenue, and we can't have $200 million taken out of our budget. So it's a difficult situation, but it's what we have.
When do you get another income tax draw, and will you know more based on that or not really?
The next big distribution is at the end of May. You will have already adopted your budget at that point, which is one of the real difficulties for us. Our second biggest revenue, we only see half of it. And we don't know that it's exactly half. We just see roughly half of it. So every time we get a big distribution, we know a little bit more, but it doesn't always make us more confident in our understanding, especially since, the next one, could be down a little bit, and then the last one could be up again. Again, back to it's a trend until it's not a trend. This is the hardest thing we have to deal with, and it might not be too far off target to say the reason Deb came to the commissioner's office and left us was so she didn't have to do this anymore. So again, looking op plan to op plan, the top is the plan that we're working on. Below is your existing plan. And then here is the change. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, things pulling in different directions, a net benefit in the first couple of years, a net loss in the later years. And that is primarily because of us backing off of our assumed rate of growth. Commissioner Vigliotti, you asked about did we ever have a 0 year of reconciling? Our lowest was $9.2 million. That was in fiscal year 10.
Tax year 10.
Tax year 10, sorry. Yep.
9.2 in year 10,
Yes.
2010.
This is a slide we haven't presented before, but I thought it might be interesting for you. Didn't turn out to be quite as useful as I hoped. But this is looking at income tax by tax year instead of fiscal year. Sometimes when you look at it that way, it takes out some of the noise of what's going on. But it's really interesting. You look at this. Tax year 20 up 3%, 21 13%, 22 0.3%, 23 7%. So even getting out of the problems of dealing with it by fiscal year, you see tax year, this is bouncing all over the place. Anybody who says in tax year 19 that they can predict what this is going to look like is fooling themselves. Now, you might be able to get a reasonable average over those years, but to say what's going to happen year by year. And, you think about, this year where we had 0.3%. So second largest revenue basically stood still. That potentially has significant implications for, what happened when you budgeted. If you were expecting 3 or 4 or 5%, that matters. Okay, recordation, our third largest revenue, but much, much smaller. Property tax, talking about $250 million, income tax, $200 million, recordation, we're talking about less than $20 million. So these are our actuals going back to fiscal year 9. Fiscal year 25 is in red, just so I remind you that you raised the tax rate for recordation. Without that rate change, that would be $13.8 million. So it would look a lot more like 24 than it does now. These were two unusual years. The highest recordation we've ever had in a year was just under $23 million. So those were getting up to highest collections we've ever had. We knew we couldn't count on that. This is a general expectation. This is not. The trick is figuring out how far we'll go down and stabilize. And it's a little bit after that $23 million year. Remember, we had long discussions about how low could recordation go and stabilize. And I think we settled on $13 or $14 million. 14? And we actually saw it go down to $7 million. Just like we didn't count on 23, we certainly weren't counting on 7.
I think back then it was 17 million that you were,
Okay.
yeah. And then after the drop, we settled in on our new low, we believe, or norm would be 14 million.
Oh, yeah, here is that 7.7. That's the one I was talking about. So you see actual 24, budget and forecast for 25, both $18 million, and a little bit of an increase for 26. And there's two things that drive recordation revenue. One is how many transactions do you have, and the other is how much your house is selling for. I must have skipped a slide. We lost the slide. House prices are not falling and maybe even still growing, although they're not growing the way they once were. Number of transactions is considerably down. But, you know, we're kind of saying here we expect that home prices will still lead to a little bit of growth.
And we're also one of 5 counties that don't have transfer fees.
Yes.
So a lot of folks package transfer fees and recordation tax together when we're talking about home sales. But we don't have that.
Yeah, every county has a recordation tax, but there's a handful, all but a handful have a transfer tax too. And they're pretty much the same. You know, as far as revenue goes, they act the same. Okay, investment income. This is a interesting story. Pink line is how much interest we're earning on our investments. Sorry, the number of dollars, and the blue line is what we're earning. And you can see we were crawling along the floor for a lot of years there, shot up. And then, like I said a little bit earlier, this time last year, the expectation was interest rates were going to be getting pushed down. I think that's still true, but the speed that that's going to happen has changed a lot. We had actuals a little under 11 in 24. We're looking for about 12 in 25 and about 11 in 26. Now, our investment income is driven by 2 things. One is the size of our portfolio. How much money do we have to invest? And the other is how much are we earning on those investments? Now, we did slow the rate of decrease in our assumed interest rates, but we do still have it dropping down to 3% over the 6 years. A bigger change is going to be in our portfolio. Right now, we have some cash that won't always be there. You know, think cash that's on the state's attorney's headquarters capital project. It's being invested now. As that gets spent, it's no longer available for investment. We have $11 million on the Northern Landfill project for eventual development. That's not being spent right now, but it will be spent. So we have to try and look ahead and say what cash is going to continue to be there and what cash is going to be spent. And look at plan to plan, and this is another big change. You know, here's what we were expecting when you adopted your plan last May. This is what we're expecting now. Here's what we were expecting when you adopted your plan last May. So we've added noticeably to the bottom line. And to Commissioner Vigliotti's point a little bit earlier, the amount we've added to the bottom line decreases as we move across the years because we expect the portfolio to be getting smaller and we expect interest rates to be lower.
So Ted, can I ask, I mean, so for example, you know, we have money sitting to the side for the Northern Landfill project, and when that gets spent, obviously that's no longer investable income. So, I mean, for example, if we go through the budget cycle this year and we say we want to take, I don't know, $5 million of fund balance and invest that, is that something we can do to use the fund balance?
It all gets invested.
Well, okay, all right.
Yeah, if it's anything that isn't going to be spent in the short term is always invested.
Okay, thank you, wanted to make sure.
And, you know, my using the Northern Landfill was probably a bad example because money that's tied to enterprise funds,
Okay.
those investments go to the enterprise funds, so that doesn't help your bottom line. But there are other pots of money, you know, in a similar sort of idea that, you know, we might say that's going to be spent next year, or we might say that's not going to be spent in the next 5 years. Okay, building permits is a small revenue. The reason I bring it up, though, is because it's tied to recordation and to property tax revenue, so I think it's worth looking at. Here you see residential permits issued by year. In 20 and 21, we had about 600 and 500. Those are out of our norm these days. If you go back far enough, we used to have much, much more than that. But hanging around 300 or so seems to be where we mostly are. And, ideas of how many houses we're building in Carroll County comes up a lot. And, if there's 200 houses being built next to your development, it seems like a lot. But when you're looking county-wide, we really don't have that much going on. There was a time when we had 12, 14, 1,600 permits a year. And I believe things have changed in a way that we will never see that again. Environmental restrictions on developing off of public utilities has changed things a lot. Availability of water, what public utility systems can handle, and in the towns and in the county, how much growth do we want? How much are we willing to do? All those things, I think, have pushed down the number of homes a year we can expect. And I mentioned, it ties to property tax. You build a house, and that shows up in new construction, adds to your revenue. And then the next time there's an assessment, you have another house to be reassessed. And of course, with recordation, a new house gets sold and somebody is paying recordation tax. You see a small revenue and really nothing happening here. Okay, I'm going to move on from revenues now to talk about the operating plan.
Ted, can I?
Yep.
And you're done revenues, right? So, right now, last year came in better than could have. We're worried about the state taking money, Blueprint costing money, et cetera, et cetera. If we took income tax to the max allowed, that's like 11 million.
Yes.
And tell me if this sounds right, I forget where I wrote it. If we wanted to get 57 million of new income, we'd have to raise property taxes. So 57 minus that 11, we'd have to raise it 17 or 18 cents. It would be astronomical to the homeowners, right?
Yes. I don't know if that's the right number, but the right
Well,
idea.
Two and a half, or a little more per penny?
$2.7 million per penny now.
Okay, 2.7 per penny, okay.
Yeah, and on income tax, for people listening, there's a state mandated cap of 3.2% on local income tax. We're currently at 3.3. To Commissioner Kyler's question, if we were to go to our legal authority, that would add about $11 million a year.
We're at 3.03,
Oh, what did I say?
3.3.
Oh.
That's right.
Yes.
But the max allowed is 3.2. We are currently at 3.03. Right. Did you talk about impact fees?
No, they don't touch your operating budget. That'd be capital. But
And
It's not-
and the reason I apologize, I just want, because we're talking about revenue and some goes into operational, some not. I want to clarify because we're asked often to get more impact fees. And how are impact fees, gathered residential and commercial?
And what's the restriction on
Right.
using it?
Correct.
yeah, so first, impact fees aren't generating much revenue because we're not building a lot of houses. And can only be used for capital purposes and can only be used in connection with needs generated by growth. And in schools now, our enrollment is not growing quickly. We have capacity. I would really be hard pressed to think we could make a case to increase our school impact fee.
And the capacity we're talking about is countywide.
Yes.
It is not, our community down in Eldersburg with the elementary school. It is the entire county when we're looking at capital projects, correct?
Right. Impact fees are collected inside the boundaries of Carroll County and spent inside the boundaries of Carroll County.
And so, if the school decides to do an addition at Freedom Elementary or Sykesville, that may be considered growth. We may be able to use impact fees for that. But if they have to add on for special needs, for autism, for kindergarten, that's not growth. We couldn't use it for that, right?
Right. And we do have some impact fees on the Sykesville project.
Correct.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay, there are lots of assumptions in the operating plan. I don't know how many, but it's probably hundreds. I'm just going to hit on a few of them. Carroll County Public Schools assume growth 3%. Now, somebody could make a very reasonable argument that 3% is not enough growth for the school system. Of course, now keep in mind, this is just Carroll County, this is funding coming from Carroll County. They also get funding from the state. But we run into a math problem here. I talked about your largest revenue, property tax. In a couple of years, we're looking at growth of 2.5%. If your largest revenue is growing 2.5% and your largest expenditure, the school system, is growing at 5 or 6 or 7%, pretty quickly see that there's not enough money being generated to support that unless you're making major negative changes to everything else that you spend on. And of course, many things you can't make that choice anyway. Salaries are in the plan at 5%, and this now includes the sheriff. For a number of years, there was a 4% assumption there, and that was tied to 3 years where the commissioners made significant changes to sheriff's salaries. Some time has gone by. It gets confusing. I figured it was time to just make one assumption across all the agencies you fund now. General assumption of 3%. A place where we don't have a good reason to make a specific assumption, we build in 3%. But I want to say about this and other assumptions. We build in assumptions in order to build the plan. But none of them ever happen just because there was an assumption there. Every year, every expenditure gets rethought. Sometimes something gets budgeted above an assumption. We have new information, something changed. But many times, things end up getting budgeted for less than the assumption that was built in. But I don't want anybody to ever think that the budget is kind of on autopilot and it just increases because you built in an increase. Corrections, 5%. This is just recognition that there are certain costs in the detention center that act the way they act. And big in this is medical costs and drugs. And also, when the population goes up, that changes things. And right now, we've actually seen population go up a bit, not a startling change, but we'd been pretty steady for a number of years, and we've seen it change now. So of course, every inmate you add adds something to the cost. But particularly if you get an inmate who has medical problems, because when they're in the jail, their problems are our problems. Risk management, this is about a number of different things, but the big one is workers' compensation. So again, this is just reacting to experience.
And Ted, just to remind myself, just so I know I have the numbers, for our operating budget, 45% of that goes to the schools, correct? It's about 246 million?
I think it's more than that.
I believe that's the number that's planned for 26 now, yeah.
Okay.
And it is about 45% or so.
Okay.
Board of Elections, 6%. Remember, this is another state agency, state employees. We have no say in running it, but we get to pay the bill, the whole bill. And again, this is just saying 6% is about what we've been seeing. So no point in assuming something less than is actually going to show up. Debt service, of course, we're building in the debt service that we already know, but then we're looking ahead to capital projects and when we expect to spend the money. We don't budget the debt service just because there's an appropriation. We budget the debt service when we think the bonds will be issued and we'll actually start paying for them. The assumed use of surplus of 1% in the next budget. Reserve for contingencies, 2/3% of annual revenue. This is a change the board made last year. Can't say I'm a fan of the change, but I understand the motivation. In many years, it won't matter, but there will be a year where we will wish we still had the 1%.
Can you describe what that is?
Oh, sorry. It's an actual appropriation in the operating budget. It's money that's available to spend, but is not tied to any expected expenditure. It's the commissioner's first line of flexibility for the unexpected. In many years, it goes largely unspent. Probably the biggest reason that it gets used is when we have a bad winter and we exceed our budget for snow and ice removal. Another place it could come up is if the state does something during the middle of the year, as they did in, I think, fiscal year 9 or 10. This would have been the first place we would have gone to try and make things work. Although in that year, we had to go far, far beyond that.
Now, Ted, that would that also be used for things like we had that issue the other year with the storm that came through? And we obviously had to spend county funds to interact and resolve some of that.
Yeah, so that's also handled in the same budget that we do snow removal, but same idea. Yeah, if we exceed what we budget, then yes, that'd be the place that we would look. And, and on that, there are different ways of budgeting for storms and snow removal. And there's a good number of counties who I believe badly under budget it, hoping that they will have a good winter. And then we'll figure it out if it doesn't. We can't possibly afford to budget for every year for the worst possible year we can imagine. But we do try and budget in a way that will cover us in most years. Nonprofit service providers have a bunch of different rates varying from 1% to 5%. And that goes back to a board decision in fiscal year 17. Occasionally been talked about, but never acted on. AgPres debt service. This is when we buy an easement with an installment purchase agreement. Basically, we're paying for it over 20 years rather than just handing somebody a check. We have to budget for those payments. There was $1 million of one-time money added to AgPres in this fiscal year 25 budget. All right. We did have one IPA, right? Yeah, so I think there was one, so that will change our debt service. As things stand, though, moving forward, There is no cash available for installment purchase agreements. So this will be going down every year. Pension and OPEB, we have actuaries do studies to tell us what we need to do to be appropriately funded. So we get those studies and then act on that. And then, like I was saying a little bit earlier, various other specific assumptions, many other specific assumptions. And this can be as big as how much do we expect our medical costs to grow? County is self-insured, so the costs are what they are, so we have to plan to try and stay ahead of that. Or as small as, every 3 years we buy some code books for permits and inspections, $7,800. We will put that $7,800 in 1 year, we take it out for 2 years, we put it back in the next year. So we truly are trying anywhere we know something or we can make a reasonable assumption, we're trying to make the op plan as real a picture as we can. Some of the things that are driving the op plan. Now, these are increases, things that make it worse. State pension cost shift. We originally had different language there. I changed it to cost shift because I wanted to specifically say it that way because it's all it is. The state is making us pick up more of teacher pensions. About a decade ago, they gave us part of it first time. I don't believe when they first did it there was any logical argument for this. People at the state will say, well, this is serving people in Carroll County. Again, we have no role in the pension. We have no role in hiring or paying teachers. This was nothing more than a way for them to reduce a cost, to make it easier to balance their budget. I've been worried all the years since then that they were going to come back to this. I'm a little surprised that it hasn't come up before now, but now they are back to it. But this is a change. It's not just more money, it's a change in what they think it's doing. What we have been paying, and right now, we took on the cost, but it's in the school system's budget. And it pays what they call the normal cost, the liability that's being generated right now. What they want us to take on now is the increase in the unfunded liability for the last year. Unfunded liability means the state hasn't kept up with appropriate funding. So they're now passing on some of that to counties. Now, it's just for the change of 1 year now, but once you've taken that step, how hard is it to increase that next year? And where might this stop? Do we counties, someday have the entire burden for this? And again, I don't believe there's any logical argument for this cost belonging to counties, in part or in total. But if the state passes a law that says it's our responsibility, then it becomes our responsibility.
Do you mind explaining that again? Because I just want to understand it better. I do understand it, but I know I'm not supposed to ask questions. But it sounds
Okay.
very important.
Again, it's just, you can come visit me or we can talk on the phone. I'd be glad to talk with you more. There's another change in this. What we have today is about school system teacher pension. The community college is also in the pension system, but we weren't involved in that. Now we're going to be involved in the college too. And this is a relatively small piece. In our budget, the dollars are not a big deal. But conceptually, I think this is a big deal because another door opened. Once they pass $1 to us, why not pass $10 to us? Then the estimate there, I don't believe there's any reasonable argument for why counties should be responsible for this. And they make the same, at the state, they make the same argument. Well, this is benefiting people in Carroll County. You know, once you make that argument, I mean, how many things are there in the state budget that aren't about benefiting people who live in a county? I mean, everybody in Maryland lives in a county. It's not an argument that I'm a fan of. But we've had the 50% for a decade or more. There have been, I believe we went to 60% one year, went back down to 50. There have been a number of attempts to make it 90. 90% is built into legislation again this year. It's another 520,000.
Roughly.
Again, nobody's any better off for this. It just means it's money the state doesn't have to find, and now you do. Some op plan drivers working in the,
On the last slide.
oh, I brought it up earlier. Decreases from the operating, from the existing adopted plan. These are things that are making your bottom line better. Debt service, although this is mostly about timing changes, so it makes some years better, but doesn't necessarily decrease the overall debt we'll be taking on eventually. Board of Education debt service is partially about timing, but also, and we'll talk about this more when we come back with the recommended budget, but moving some projects out of the plan. Public Works, we were able to decrease our assumptions for increases in fuel costs, and also number of positions where people with experience left. And then matching EMS billing expenditures to EMS billing revenue. Two things going on here. One, we have some actual experience now, so we're not just guessing at how much revenue is going to come in. And we now feel comfortable with a higher number than we did at this time last year. So there's more revenue available. And then the other is attaching EMS expenditures to this revenue. Now remember, this is a restricted revenue. It can only be used for EMS expenditures. So with a smaller revenue estimate, there were some EMS expenditures, things that are appropriate for this, that were being funded with general tax dollars. We're moving that into this revenue fund, which then frees up tax dollars and improves your bottom line. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this, but here are numbers tied to some of the things that I've been talking about. If you look at it later and this leads to any questions, we can take this up next time. So, and on this, red numbers are good. Red numbers help. So, if you remember back to the improved revenue picture, and this isn't everything in the op plan, but of these items that we pulled out, you see this is helping the bottom line as well. Of course, don't lose, though, that there are things moving in different directions, like you see state retirement, adding $5 or $6 million a year to your expenditures. And I know I say this a lot, but I sometimes think you can't say it too many times. This is not a choice that you're making. And of those revenue increases, there's $5 million of revenue increase that doesn't do a thing for you because the state decided you're going to use it to pay for this.
Hey, Ted, how are you getting the totals from the numbers that you're displaying?
It's the
not-
two slides. It's this slide
It's that slide.
and this slide, all added.
I got it. Okay, I apologize.
I should have just said bad math.
No, it's all good.
You say topics to discuss, topics to think about, things we'll have to deal with. Blueprint, of course, It's gotten lots of discussion. The superintendent will be here on Thursday to talk to you about the school's implementation plan and implications. Program open space and highway user revenue, we talked some about earlier. If nothing else happens, these aren't a problem this year, but I'm still have some concern for this year and certainly for years to come. SDAT, we talked about, again, a choice somebody else made. 500,000 of the revenue increase we showed you, state decided how to use it. Pensions, what else? What else might emerge before we're done with the state budget? Federal funding. In some way, the concerns about the state seem more immediate, but this is potentially very big for us. And my point here is not to talk politics or to say what's good or bad, just to say with choices that are being made or could be made, there are impacts that we will have to deal with. There's talk of taking $880 million, not directly, it has not been directly attached to Medicaid, but it's been attached to the pot of funding that Medicaid comes out of. But it seems unlikely that $880 million could actually be found without touching Medicaid. And that touches us in a lot of places, housing and homelessness. We're talking about EMS billing. Medicaid is in the mix. On the EMS billing, just our standard thing, 7% of the bills are paid by Medicaid. But then there's the other piece that we're pursuing, which I think $800,000 we're hoping for, which I believe is totally about Medicaid. Some of our nonprofits, at least in part, are getting funded by Medicaid for people that they're serving. And thinking about the nonprofits, and this is not just about Medicaid, but the federal funding changes, all kinds of things that could affect our nonprofit service providers. I think about Human Services Program, HSP, housing and homelessness. They run our shelters for us. If there's a significant impact to them, and I'm not predicting this at this point, I'm just thinking about what could happen. What if they say we can't run your shelters? What do we do then? And not looking for an answer, just saying there's a question out there. Citizen services, I mentioned housing. Will there be big changes to HUD? And if housing funding goes down, homelessness almost surely goes up. And then what does that mean to us? Schools, federal funding is only about 4% of their budget, but they have a lot of employees who are paid by federal funding. If that funding goes away, do those employees and services go away? Do we try to do something about that? Again, not looking for an answer, just saying there's going to be something we might be thinking about. And a very different thing, bridges. County has more than 155 bridges. Almost all of them qualify for federal funding. The bridges that qualify for federal funding are 80% funded by the federal government. If that funding goes away, again, we've got something to think about.
So, most of the state is not benefiting us service-wise, so it's not like we can cut out something, we don't have a choice. Federal, some of that, we could make hard choices to delete some services if they stop funding it.
Yes. And another tricky part of this, there are some things that we are mandated by the federal government or the state to do, even if the funding goes away. Okay. There are other things where that's not true. And then, yes, we could make a choice to say that's just not happening anymore. I don't think we have very many places where that's going to feel like an easy choice if we have to do it, but you would have in your hands to say, well, we just have to stop. Board of Education capital. This is not a new concern, but it's one that's not going to go away. We have 40 buildings in the school system, and we are not doing very many replacements or major modernizations. We recently did East Middle School and Career and Tech, but that's unusual. We haven't done 2 schools in that short time frame in a long time. I think the last replacement or modernization we did before those was Mount Airy Middle School, which has, I don't remember what year it was, but it's been a while. And before that was probably North Carroll Middle School, which has, I'm sure, been 20 years. So we're not doing the major projects, so we've been kind of doing piecemeal work, roofs, HVACs, sometimes windows or electrical systems. But costs have changed a lot, and funding has not kept up with it. And particularly talking about state funding when I say that. So we devote 9.09% of our income tax to school construction. We use that sometimes cash to buy a brick, or sometimes to service the debt on bonds we issued to buy that brick. We have to be very careful about the mix, because we don't want to get overcommitted to debt service. But there are pressures, and I think those pressures are going to grow. You know, the school system's top priority now is Liberty High School, a modernization or replacement. I don't think they've dug deeply into this, but I've seen cost estimates exceeding $100 million. I don't remember exactly how much. William Winchester has been their top priority for a number of years. It got bumped by Liberty, but it doesn't make William Winchester any less a concern. It's just, is it number 1 or is it number 2? Now, we actually have some capacity to do more in the school construction program. We have some room built up in that dedicated local income tax. The question is, if we do more, can we expect more from the state? And on the surface, I think the answer is no. The state can always choose to fund whatever school project they want. But we can look at history and say, what can we reasonably expect to get from them? And I think that is $10 to $15 million a year. Now, I think about, just say for talking purposes, Liberty High School is $100 million, and say the state is in for $45 million, and they're willing to give us $15 million a year. That means 3 years of state funding on Liberty High School and no state funding left for anything else. No roofs, no HVACs, no pre-kindergarten classrooms. So if we can get deeper into that if the conversations go somewhere. But I just wanted you to have kind of a sense of what we're up against there. Now, in the recommended budget that will be coming to you, we do have design and construction of 4 kindergarten pre-K classrooms. Now, the kindergarten part of this goes all the way back to when the state mandated full-day kindergarten, however many years that's been. We have 4 schools that we haven't gotten to. They're in there along with the pre-K portion, which is another piece of the Blueprint mandate. Blueprint doesn't mandate us building space, but they mandate us taking the students, and if you don't have the space, then it may as well be a mandate to build the space. And then there's also funding for future pre-K additions beyond the ones that are specifically planned. And then there are still some systemics, roofs and HVACs. we've had to back away from some of what we thought we were going to do as we try and consider what we can count on from the state. Now, it can get tricky sometimes because somebody might say to you, well, that project is eligible for state funding, and be correct. Yes, that project is eligible. But if you have 6 projects that are all eligible for state funding that add up to $100 million, and you can only expect to get $50 million, it doesn't really matter that they're eligible. That being eligible doesn't get you anything. It just means that it's possible. Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. We know that as it works now, they cannot support themselves. There is a general fund transfer necessary, and that transfer will be growing over time. The red here is good. The situation is a little bit better than it was this time last year, and this is again about earnings on our investments. Remember, I mentioned earlier that if money is tied to an enterprise fund, whatever is earned on that money is part of that enterprise fund. So in the short term, they're helped a little bit, but you can see as you move through the years that how much we need to put in just continues to grow.
Are we ever going to get to a point where we don't rely on fund transfer?
Not without some fundamental change in how we operate. And multiple boards have talked about this. No board has ever been willing to act. I believe you would need one of 2 things to happen. Either you would need to legislate flow control, meaning that waste has to come to the Northern Landfill, and/or you would need a ready-to-serve charge. Basically, everybody pays something because the landfill is available. Again, been talked about. Nobody's ever been willing to do either of those things. Without that, I don't believe there is any path to it being self-sustaining.
I think I'd just like to have that conversation, because it seems like every year we talk about the exact same thing, and we don't get,
Yes, and it's,
it's always a general fund transfer, okay, and I'd rather see that money go somewhere else.
yeah, well, the basic problem is just the costs of operating the landfill are greater than the revenue that the landfill, as things work now, can generate. Public Works is going to be coming to you to talk about tipping fees, which might make this a little bit better, but really far from making the problem go away.
Okay, thanks.
A few other things, and this is by no means the list of everything that's on my mind, but just a few I think need to be mentioned. We know we have to make changes to Pine Run Dam. That's still ahead of us. We recently were informed that the federal share of the design is going to be less than we thought it might be, and we're still waiting for firm word on how much they're going to participate in the construction costs. My guess is that what we have budgeted now will not be enough to do the project. PFAs, we know this is not going away. There's still not a lot of clarity on what has to be done, but this is another one where I believe what we have budgeted won't be enough to do what we will eventually be required to do. So we have 5 million?
3, 5?
So, because last year we put in,
I thought it was 3, okay.
It was 3. You added 2 last year.
So we have 5 million aside, and we have about $250,000 in the operating budget each year. That's not about remediation. That's about testing and locating and understanding the problem.
Right.
The 5 million is for remediation, but that's where I think, it's just not hard for me to imagine it's going to end up costing more than that. Enterprise fund rates, I mentioned solid waste coming in, public works coming in. Public works is also going to be coming in to talk about water and sewer. And just to set that up, something people have heard from me before, I don't believe there's any case to be made that we could significantly change the costs of running the system. People who are on the system are supposed to pay for the system, so it really becomes just a math problem of what the rates have to be in order to generate enough funding. If there's not enough funding, the only thing that can happen is utilities doesn't do something that they should be doing. Northern Landfill, talked about operating. Also capital side, we bought roughly 300 acres to be able to expand our operation. We have $11 million put aside for that. I don't believe $11 million will be enough to do what we're going to need to do. And there are some important decisions that are going to need to be made there. The biggest might be how much do we intend to bury and how much do we intend to transfer. Burying is a lot less expensive, but of course, the landfill, even our new bigger landfill, will still be finite. Once you put something in, that you can't use it anymore. Transferring is much more expensive, but it keeps your capacity available to you. But the choice we make on what's that combination going to be will have a significant impact on the fund. And, going back to self-sustaining, if we stop transferring, that would change the picture tremendously. I've never actually thought about that quite that way until this moment. So I'm not sure exactly how much we're spending on transferring, but if it stopped, the fund would look very, very different. Maybe even be self-sustaining. I don't want to say that without looking.
That's a lot of money.
Yes.
I don't know, so.
And federal impact on nonprofit service providers, I hit that earlier. So where does that leave us? This is the bottom line of the op plan as it exists today. And I know I've heard some of you talk about the almost $30 million. That's the number that you were looking at. Here's where we are today. Again, with all the caveats of we still have a lot of the year to go. We still have big questions about income tax. We still have big questions about what the state's going to do, what the federal government's going to do. But with how we've handled all that to now, here's what those same years look like in the op plan that we'll be bringing you in a couple weeks. So you see your first 3 years are balanced. The last 2 are still unbalanced, but in considerably better position. But I think it's really important, though, to look at this, recognize that our position is better, but the fundamental problem we have doesn't go away here. As you look left to right, you see our situation gets worse with each passing year. If we had this and these numbers, well, that can't quite say that, but if our balance was growing with each year, that means we're in a position to potentially make decisions on things we want to do and build it into a plan that works. This doesn't say that.
And Ted, this includes the automatic increases that we give to the schools every year.
Yes, the 3%.
3%.
And that's about, what, 7.2 million, give or take?
Yes. And, important to note there, we planned 3% for them for a lot of years. There aren't too many years where that ended up being the final number. Commissioners have often added to it. And last year, I think we added another $6 or $7 million
Right.
on top of the
Right.
planned $7 million. And, clearly there's a lot of interest in the school budget. I go back to a point that was, a couple points that have come up, and not just here today, but, you've been hearing from a lot of people. Per pupil funding in Carroll County, I don't know if it is last, but when you combine state and county, it's low. But that's much more about the state than it is about the county. I haven't seen numbers for fiscal year '25, but I looked at numbers for fiscal year '24. And per pupil county funding to the school system was 9th in the state, and it was $10 behind Baltimore County, so you pretty much could say 8th in the state. The problem is we're very, very low in what the state sends to Carroll County Public Schools. I had another thought. I don't remember. There was something else about school funding, but I lost it.
Well, the other thing that a lot of folks are talking about is the $7 million that's being, the maintenance of effort, plus what's necessary, and then the blueprint requirements. So it's two separate, numbers packaged together. And if we look at them separately, we can deal with one, to get to $4+ million more, to get to the 11 million. It's the other one that's going to really be the real topics that we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah, and you reminded me, in the 30 years I've been here, I believe we've funded the school system and maintenance effort 3 times, and 2 of those were back in the 90s. Recently, did a little bit of work for the board, and if we look back to fiscal year 20 and said, if we had funded at maintenance of effort in 20 and then continued to fund maintenance of effort, how would that compare to where we are today? And that was the roughly $40 million somebody mentioned earlier. We are funding $40 million more than we would have been required to do in these last 5 years. Now, of course, every year we fund in excess of maintenance of effort. We set a new maintenance of effort. Right. So it gets complicated thinking about this. All you can do is pick a time frame and look at that. And then to the last thing Commissioner Rothstein was saying, the school system is dealing with 2 different things. They touch each other in a lot of ways, but they are different. One is balancing this year's budget. And given their expectations for state revenue and county revenue, they believe they were $3.6 million out of balance. Important to point out, though, that did not include any salary increases. Right. So it had been balancing everything without salary increases. The superintendent made some proposals to get rid of that 3.6%, closing outdoor school, getting rid of laptops for grades 3 through 5, change to how bus contractors are compensated, reduction in materials, might have been another piece or 2. And it's easy to criticize those choices, but the superintendent is in a very difficult position. They went through a decade of declining enrollment, which meant state funding was stagnant or growing very slowly. And every year, they had to make choices in the budget to make that budget work. And they'll talk about having eliminated 300 positions or something like that. I mean, that's part of those year-by-year decisions to make each budget work. The consequence now, though, is they don't have a lot of places left to go to that don't have obvious impacts. And I believe Blueprint is a problem for every county. But some counties aren't up against quite the same problem that Carroll County is, because they do still have places where they say, okay, well, we like that position, but you know what? We could get rid of that if we have to. There are more choices left to them. Of course, the Board of Education turned away some of the superintendent's suggestions for balancing the budget, and that eventually led to their budget request. Again, then so one is balancing the budget. Second piece is Blueprint compliance. And I think there's a lot of, if not misunderstanding, at least lack of understanding. The Blueprint legislation requires some very, very specific things of school systems. And the big thing is most money has to follow certain students and go to their schools. That's where the big problem emerges here. How do you do that? And that's what led to the superintendent recommending the elimination of 90 or so positions and moving of 90-some positions. Those changes were necessary to meet the law. I don't think you would find anybody in the school system who thinks this is a good idea or something that they want to do. So in the budget request, there's the $7 million that was already in your plan. There was $6 million to balance the budget in ways that are different than what the superintendent suggested, and to provide funding for salary increases for the 2 contracts that were negotiated to include fiscal year '26. And then $44 million was about Blueprint compliance. And what the school system is saying here is, with $44 million, we believe we can comply without resorting to the negative changes that we are talking about now. So rather than having to shift money or teacher from Carrolltown to Tawnytown, you would add a position in Tawnytown. Of course, as we talked about through this whole thing, I suspect you all don't want to see these changes any more than the school system does. But what's the alternative? As we talked about way back in the beginning, you could use your fund balance and make this work for 1 year, but then what do we do next year? And there's no good answer to that question.
And I think we'll hear more details on Thursday. And the delegation, well, the House in Annapolis doesn't even want to talk about Blueprint. The Senate's talking a little bit. The governor's trying. I'm hoping AIB, and again, 4 or 5 years ago, they told us it would cost us $0, that they were going to work it all out. Now they're saying get the money from us, but sooner or later, they have to look at their formula, and they have to look at some of the requirements and maybe do some waivers to counties that are doing a good job educating both from autism to gifted and talented. My worry is, even if they decided tomorrow they'd do that, can it help this year? Now, the only way it can help is if they would give a waiver, and that's going to be tough. And I know central office has been to Annapolis a lot in the last 3 weeks, trying to ask for stuff, and doesn't matter. But Carroll County was the first county 4 or 5 years ago that said this is where we'd be, and they kept telling us we were wrong. And,
Yes, the superintendent has been talking about this for a long time.
Yep.
And on changing the legislation, we can hope, but right now, I don't think there's any sign that we can count on something happening. And in fact, it sounds like even the governor proposed delaying the collaboration time by 4 years, which I don't think was a solution because we'd still be left with the same problem 4 years from now where the teacher's going to come from. But even that apparently has not made it through committees on either side.
Correct. And, yeah, I mean, maybe folks are seeing it shuffling from one side to the other, but you're absolutely right. And just like Commissioner Kyler shared, you know, the delegation down there, I mean, she does not want to even have the conversation. Now, I will say that our delegation, along with Senator Reedy and Senator Ferguson, are trying to come up with better solutions, but the real question is who can influence the delegation. And the governor, you know, has a few ideas, some ideas we may not like, you know, but regardless, when it comes to funding this, it is one big hot mess. And
Delegate Stanko is getting very much into the details. Evidently, it's on Facebook or YouTube, his talk he gave at District 5 night in Annapolis, and he really nailed the problem with the magnitude of the money.
so what we'll do is continue to work it, you know, with them. I do look forward to hearing the superintendent's conversation. She does have a town hall tomorrow evening, and I know I'll be also at Century High School. I think she has two,
I think so.
one at Century tomorrow and then one,
I think it's,
I can't remember.
is it in Westminster
After.
somewhere, I think?
I think it's next month.
Is it next? I don't know. We'll make sure we find out. So,
So where do we go from here? 18th, we'll be back with the recommended budgets, and that will be for everything. So we'll talk operating capital, enterprise funds, et cetera. Mentioned earlier, Sunny and I, 4-7, assuming that they don't stretch the session. You have proposed sessions set up between 3:27 and 4:15. You know, as we've done in the past, you know, we'll have scenarios built for you. We'll be able to handle your what-ifs pretty much on the fly. Let you see if we make this change, what does that do? If we make this change, what does it do? The release of the proposed budget is scheduled for 4/22. I will be out for 5 public presentations beginning that same night. Public hearing is scheduled for the 6th of May. We have adopted sessions set up for you to discuss any changes you might still want to make at that point, and adoption is scheduled for the 22nd of May. And then I'll say this more than just today, but I'll start today. There's not a lot of flexibility in the schedule. Kind of the time we have is the time we have unless the board chooses to devote more time to doing it. It always seems like a lot, but it goes fast, and we almost always get near the end, and it's like, oh, wait a second, we haven't talked about this, we haven't talked about that.
And the public hearing is May 6th, and what I think I've learned the last 2 years, we're limited in what we can do after the public hearing without having another public hearing, correct? Like we can't raise revenues. There's things we can't do without another public hearing, right? We have more flexibility before May 6th than we do after.
There are some revenues that would require another public hearing and another public notice.
And there's just not enough time after May 6th to do it, and,
It's a very limited amount of time after that.
okay.
which, you know, is important because you go out there and the fact is, I've been doing this 6+ years. You've had half a dozen folks at most come to the presentations you provide at all the different libraries. Our thoughts and ideas and comments from the community, I mean, this is the schedule, so I'm really talking to the community. We need the input. We need the candid insight and priorities to allow us to balance our budget, you know? And after so many years, I'm still not getting that insight and candid thoughts. I get 3 or 4.
Yeah, those sessions are not well attended. If I get 30 or 40, that's a big day.
It's a boom.
More likely to get
Right,
5 or 7.
right.
I've actually done the presentation for one person. And, you know, my goal in doing these presentations is to share with people what's in your proposed budget, what's not in your proposed budget, share thinking where I can. It's an opportunity for people to deepen their understanding of what's there. And while the formal public hearing is not a question and answer session,
Right.
those ones where I'm presenting this, we absolutely do get into conversations. I can go where people want to go, you know, if they want to talk more about something. So back to the beginning of all this, you know, we pushing something my way?
I will be.
We aren't making any decisions today. Just trying to give you things to be thinking about as we get closer. And again, if between now and the 18th, there's anything that the board wants to say we'd really like to see, you know, let us know. Of course, that's not the end. You know, even as we're going through the proposed things, it's not unusual for you to question something or ask for more information, and we'll do our best to get you that. Oh, they are on now?
They will be,
Okay.
including this presentation.
Okay, so this came up a little bit earlier, but just a reminder that today or tomorrow, this presentation and budget documents will be available online. And those continue as we move through the process. You know, recommended goes up, then the proposed goes up, so people can follow along if they want.
Okay, thank you very much. What we need is a motion to recess, go into closed at 1 or 1:15. I don't know what, it's going to be tight on the other end too. Are we going to eat here?
Yes.
Okay, so that helps everybody. So
for
I need a
admin? We're going into close for admin,
Closed admin.
closed admin.
closed administration, yes, but my question is, do you want it 1 or 1:15? And then we'd adjourn after closed administrative.
Motion to go into recess at this time till 1 o'clock, going into closed admin and adjourn following.
Second.
Any further discussion? Before we vote, I'd just like to remind everybody, on Thursday, item 6 is CCPS with a presentation. There is public comment. And we don't have a restriction on the number. It's 3 minutes.
3 minutes, yeah.
But if we're here an hour, we're here an hour, we're 2 hours, and that date is tight too, but that's the rules. So you're welcome to come and do public comment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.